allowing human beings to be like gods. And so those people were seen at the top of the hierarchy. But certainly a pharaoh, for example, who would be considered a god in human form, would have a lot of responsibilities.
The pharaohs were at the top of the hierarchy and were thought to be half god and half man. They controlled over the army, churches, and government, and their word ruled over anybody else's. After they died, they would be buried with jewels for their afterlife in towering pyramids. They even had servants that carried them around and would never touch the ground. However, they had the responsibility of the entire country, and if something went wrong, they were at blame.
They realized that the pharaoh couldn't do it all by themselves. So they had to delegate responsibility to other levels within the hierarchy of Egypt, and it kind of worked its way down.
Viziers were right below the pharaoh and had a good amount of wealth. They had a lot of responsibility, however. They needed to ensure the collection of taxes, approve legal documents, guide administration, and settle dispute among nobles. They also needed to run the house of the pharaoh.
Nobles were responsible for ruling over a specific region. They would make local laws to maintain order. This was very little work for the servants that they got and the food that the farmers needed to give them.
Priests had the same wealth as nobles with the same low level of responsibility. They would need to please the gods and advise the pharaoh.
Scribes needed to record legal documents and record local events, and even write personal things for people. They enjoyed good social rights, although they needed to go to school for 5 years, in which they needed to learn an extremely complicated alphabet and were generally beaten. They had more fair life than most of the people in Egypt. Most scribes came from scribe families, with the exception of some sons of rich merchants. Soldiers had good wealth, although they had back-breaking work and risked their life. Craftsmen's rights and responsibilities were very fair and not too different from those today. They were probably the only class whose wealth depended on their success instead of the government. They would, however, need to pay taxes and in return got protection from the government. They, out of all of the classes, came the closest to a free market economy.
Farmers had very little rights, but a lot of responsibility. They got to farm a piece of land under the control of a noble and needed to give up 3/4 of their harvest to the government, which was used at parties for the upper class. In return, they got from the government protection.
Slaves had virtually no rights and were considered property. Traded by merchants, a slave's job was to serve his master, and in return, their master would give them the basic necessities in order to live.
The social hierarchy of ancient Egypt was overall unfair. There was a negative correlation between rights and responsibilities, so the people with less responsibility, or higher government officials, generally enjoyed more rights. This, along with forced labor and social immobility, is why the ancient Egyptian social hierarchy was unfair.
In modern-day America, everyone enjoys the same rights and responsibilities. We have a social hierarchy. However, the people at the top have more benefits instead of rights, and are not forced into a certain job by birth, and our social hierarchy has mobility. Also, we do not have slaves or forced labor. This is why America is much more fair than ancient Egypt.
Do you believe that the ancient Egyptian social hierarchy and its aspects still exist in modern-day America?
No, I certainly don't believe that we have the same kind of structure or hierarchy in our country today. Certainly we allow for upward mobility within the classes. If you're successful and work hard, you can make more money and you can move up in society, whereas in Egyptian times, certainly, based on their religious beliefs, they had limitations on that.
Now, what does this type of social hierarchy say about the religion and values of the people who practice it?
Certainly the people at that time period in Egypt were very much religious, and so their governmental hierarchy and the hierarchy of society was very closely connected to their religious beliefs, whereas certainly in our country today, we have separation of church and state in which our religious values do not impact our governmental policies like they did in Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. Dugan. That will be all.